mocked. He's been beaten. Peter has already denied him. Judas has already kissed him. And he is now facing the Sanhedrin. And it says, when daylight came, the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the scribes, convened and brought him before their Sanhedrin. They said, if you're the Messiah, tell us. But he said to them, if I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. They all ask, are you then the Son of God? And he said to them, you say that I am. Now, don't miss the phrase I am in there, right? Biblically, we know that God says to Moses at the burning bush, when Moses says, who do I tell Pharaoh who do I tell him sent me? And God says to Moses, tell him I am. Right? Jesus uses the same phrase. And that would not have passed those who were trying him. That they would have caught that immediately. He's using that reference. And it says, why do we need any more testimony? They said, since we've heard it ourselves from his mouth. In other words, they heard the hypocrisy. They heard the treason in his voice. They heard the fact that he had just, in their mind, crassly associated himself as the Son of God. And it says, then their whole assembly rose up and brought him before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, we found this man subverting our nation, opposing the payment of taxes to Caesar. See, they had to come up with a political reason to crucify him. Because religiously, Caesar wanted nothing to do with the religion. So they had to come up with a political reason, and he's not paying taxes. And that was enough in many ways. He's opposing the payment of taxes to Caesar, which we know that that's wrong, right? Do you remember what happens when the Pharisees say, do you pay the tax? So he says, render under Caesar what is Caesar's, render under God what is God's. And he also does something very unique. He tells Peter to do what? To go fishing. And they pull a fish out of the water, and in the mouth of the fish is the exact amount of money they needed to pay the tax for Jesus and for Peter. There's a whole lot more to that. We're not in that spot right now. Because you only pay taxes on adults. And obviously there's 12 disciples, but Jesus and Peter are only two they need to pay taxes on, suggesting that most of the disciples were probably under the age of 18. Interesting thought, right? Most of them are following a rabbi, something you don't do once you reach your 20s. You only do that when you're young. Anyway, we're not there, right? So there's a whole sermon in there, right? And saying, paying taxes unto Caesar, this is the argument they're giving. We found this man subverting our nation, opposing payment to taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Messiah, a king. All right, so the political problem is he's saying he's a king, he's not paying taxes. So Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? He answered him, you have said it. I put my own inflection there. Pilate then told the chief priests and the crowds, I find no grounds to charge this man. In other words, he's crazy. Lots of people say they're the king, right? But they kept insisting. He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea from Galilee, where he started, even to here. When Pilate heard this, he asked if the man was Galilean. So this is what's happening this is all happening on these steps. Finding that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem during those days. Remember, we've been told everybody's coming to Jerusalem, right? There's just tens of thousands of people here. Herod was very glad to see Jesus. For a long time he had wanted to see him because he had heard about him and was hoping to see some miracle performed by him. So this is the stuff that's happening here. He goes to Herod, he comes back, and in verse 13 he comes back to Pilate. And it says, Pilate called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and they're all crowding in this space, and said to them, you have brought me this man as one who subverts the people, but in fact, after examining him in your presence, I have found no grounds to charge this man with those things you accuse him of. Neither has Herod, because he has sent him back to us. Clearly he has done nothing to deserve death, therefore I will have him whipped and then release him. For according to the festival, he had to release someone to them. Excuse me. Then they all cried out together, take this man away, release Barabbas to us. He had been thrown into prison for a rebellion that had taken place in the city and for murder. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again, but they kept shouting, crucify him. The third time he said to them, "Why? What has this man done wrong? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore I will have him whipped and then release him." But they kept up the pressure, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified, and their voices on these stones won out. So Pilate decided to grant their demand and release the one they were asking for, who had been thrown into prison for rebellion and murder. But he handed Jesus over to their will.